Thanks. So let's go into the main body of the discussions. Welcome, Prof Mugendi. We are really honored to have you join this webinar with a serious track record and the previous president of the World Design Organization. So Mugendi is a transdisciplinary industrial designer, educator, researcher, and consultant, presently working at Machakos University in Kenya. He studied in Kenya, the USA, India, and South Africa, and holds a bachelor's degree in design, a master's degree in industrial design, a higher postgrad diploma in higher education and training, and a doctorate in universal design. He's widely traveled and has taught in Kenya, Botswana, Canada, India, Norway, South Africa, and Sweden. He's passionate about various expressions of socially conscious design, including advanced ergonomics, human factors engineering, design thinking, human-centered design, designerly strategies for mitigating climate change, design for social innovation and sustainability, distributed renewable energy, indigenous knowledge systems, participatory co-design, sustainable development, sustainable transportation, and universal inclusive design. Over to you, Mugendi.
Thanks, Kate, for that lovely welcome. And colleagues, it's such an honor to be here today, especially around a topic that is close to most of our hearts. I want to give a shout out to Mo Jogi, who I saw making a comment earlier. It's nice to see old friends. In fact, there's a lovely Nigerian proverb that says that if you throw a stone in a crowded marketplace, the first person you hit would most likely be your own relative. So I feel that I'm among friends, and certainly every one of you is someone I've connected with professionally and also socially. So basically what I'd like just to share, the world for the first time had more than 50% of its population living in cities. So the role of the city and therefore the role of design cannot be overemphasized. We know that cities are built environments to the greater part, mainly planned, but we also have a lot of informality, as we know, from informal settlements and slums, which are found across different parts of the world, particularly within so-called emerging economies, of which Africa's 55 countries form the majority of what they call sub-Saharan Africa. So the role of the design practitioners, and by design, I'm actually speaking about the broader discipline or field of design, including architecture, planning, and certain aspects of civil engineering and so on. So the role of design has become more critical since that year, 2008. Well, most observers had already seen that trend happening. And now we're squarely in the 21st century, where the fourth industrial revolution is kicking in at different paces across the world. As mentioned by Kate, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated some of these realities, like this conference or workshop that we're holding together today is an example of how the COVID-19 has actually accelerated certain developments, like having virtual webinars instead of the face-to-face meetings we prefer. Secondly, if we look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which were promulgated in 2014, starting from 2015 to 2030, which is a 15-year period, and now we're about 9 years away from the end of that period, we realize that even the United Nations recognize the need to look at sustainability as a critical concern. And so the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them with the accompanying 169 targets, focus on how the different professionals around the world can make a difference in this regard. So for example, if you look at Sustainable Development Goal number 9, which looks at industry, innovation, and infrastructure, that squarely speaks to the conversation we're having today. And as Africa starts to seek more infrastructure, I'm going to focus on Africa today, if you don't mind, more than most other places, because I think that's where the real energy and dynamism is happening in the 21st century. Also, it happens to be home for most of us. So if we look at how the infrastructure needs to be accelerated to bring more and more of our people into so-called developmental spaces, then we see why the geopolitics of the region is impacted significantly by those nations that are strong in infrastructure. For example, the rise of China, to a great extent, has also demonstrated its technical capabilities beyond doubt. Additionally, when we look at Sustainable Development Goal number 11, it talks about sustainable cities and communities. Where I like this particular UN SDG is that when we talk about sustainability, often we only think about the broader economic and technical aspects of sustainability, or even environmental sustainability. But we often neglect the social sustainability. And so by looking at sustainable cities and communities, the goal of any professional should be to promote social equity and cohesion. So a lot of our activities, unfortunately, have left people more divided because of emphasizing the economic advantages some people have over others. But Sustainable Development Goal number 11 kind of reminds us that we need to look at that. And then, of course, there's climate change, Sustainable Development Goal number 13, which is affecting all of us. So we need to start to factor this into our thinking. And so to conclude, I just wanted to suggest that if you look at the World Economic Forum's analysis of what would be the top 10 skills in the 21st century, you'll find that in 2015, the first in that list of 10 was actually complex problem solving, and creativity was down at number 10. Now, if you look at what they proposed for 2020, which is more recent, complex problem solving is still number 1, critical thinking is number 2, and creativity is number 3. So the role of design and design thinking, which is what many of us subscribe to, has become more important. If you look at the remaining 10 skills, so we've said complex problem solving number 1, critical thinking 2, creativity number 3, 4 is people management, 5 coordination, coordinating with others, 6 is emotional intelligence, this is a big one, and then number 7 is judgment and decision making, 8 is service orientation, and 9 negotiation, and 10 cognitive flexibility. Now, if you look at the toolkit that the human-centered design toolkit that is offered through design thinking, you start to realize that all those 10 skills actually are factored in some measure or other. Some more importantly, like we talked about problem solving, and now number 10, cognitive flexibility is something we hadn't heard much about, but it basically is about social intelligence, how you deal with different peoples and different cultures and different circumstances. So the multiple skills or multiple intelligences that are required go beyond IQ to EQ and now SQ, which is emotional intelligence and social intelligence. And then to conclude, I want to remind us of something that many African cultures believe, and even native Aboriginal peoples of different parts of the world. And it's captured in this proverb that we did not inherit the earth from our ancestors, but we've borrowed it from our children. And the challenge for us then is to start to ask how we can leave the world a better and happier place for those that we've borrowed it from. And to conclude with one last African proverb, I'd like to say that children born on top of an anthill take a shorter time to mature. So hopefully through this conversation and many others, we hope to equip the next generation so that they start at a higher level. That is the meaning of being born on top of an anthill, so that they take a shorter time to mature. That means that the ideas, the policies, and the activities that they involve themselves in will come to maturity much faster because of the generosity of our generation, hopefully to equip them to face this future that we are handing back to them. So with those few remarks, I want to thank everyone for participation. Thank you, many friends who I can see in the chat. And thank you also, colleagues. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the conversation. Thank you. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Mugendi, for these really inspiring words. I'm really excited that the top 10 skills are so closely aligned with human-centered design. and they're all about the way we do things. There's no doubt the world is becoming more and more complex, and we have to be much smarter and work smarter to overcome the complexities. Participants, please, could you put any questions or comments into the chat? And then Prof Mugendi will have a few minutes to answer those questions or add to his presentation. I'm seeing lots of praise in the chat. Creative intelligence is key. I'm seeing Mohammed is commending the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for having Prof Mugendi. You've started on a super high note. That's great. Here's an interesting question from Lorena. What unique challenges are there for human-centered design in Africa as opposed to the Western world?
Thanks, Lorena. That's actually a brilliant question and something that a number of us have been tackling. Myself, together with a friend, Ulrich, who I hope is also present, and another friend called Ian, some time back actually looked at a HCD toolkit that is specifically focusing on the African reality. So the biggest challenge that we have, we developed this toolkit, and I'm sure it will be made available if one wants it, was to look at the idioms and the culture of the people on the continent and try to communicate in a way that spoke to their listening, so to speak. So as you know, Africa is rich in using proverbs, some of which I've generously borrowed from those who came before us. Also the use of art and visual, kind of material. So the biggest challenge is unpacking something that is akin to jargon, because if you don't unpack something in one's own language, it remains at a very superficial intellectual level. And you want this kind of thinking to get to one's heart so that it touches them emotionally. So the biggest challenge, therefore, is to translate, this kind of human-centered thinking ethos or philosophy into languages and norms that people on the continent can understand. To put it also differently, it's to take human-centered design and design thinking away from essentially urban contexts to rural ones. So maybe it's also moving from human being the individual to human being the community. So this translation of the human to become broader, to embrace communities and not just individuals, because we have to acknowledge that Africans predominantly are very communal creatures. They're social creatures, very different from the Western, not in a negative way, but the way Africans support each other in communities is much stronger. And so if you want to touch the individual, you have to touch that individual in the context of the community. And this is a philosophy we refer to as Ubuntu in Africa. So to put it finally in my own words, and I hope Lorena gets to agree with me in this way, we need an Ubuntu-friendly, human-centered design toolkit. And if we can do that, in my view, we will have solved a lot of the challenges that we would otherwise find insurmountable. Thank you.
Thanks, Mugendi. Excellent reminder about community work. And I think that some of the roots of human-centered design were early community work across the continent to do with sustainable livelihoods, water sanitation and hygiene, which was rolled out by the World Health Organization. And communities are at the heart of making meaningful social transformation, making meaningful change. Here's one additional interesting question. How do we merge human-centered design approaches with more traditional design approaches, such as an engineering design process?
Thank you. That's another interesting one, Kate, because one of the reasons I celebrate Wim and his team at Zutari is the minute engineers start to embrace human-centered design thinking, we really are onto something. There's a time I used to refer to industrial designers, which is a background I'm from, as an industrial designer as an engineer with a smile. And the reason I would quip that an industrial designer is an engineer with a smile is because designers had to deal with people, and therefore you had to have empathy. Whereas an engineer traditionally could get away with not having to deal directly with the communities or individuals that received the benefit of their talent. They dealt more with the clients, who were usually for mega projects. So shifting the thinking also from what was traditionally known as STEM education as an ethos, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to something now we are referring to as STEAM, where the A represents art and design, is going to help us. So science, technology, engineering, art and design, and mathematics is a more holistic way of looking at things. So the education of the individual, right from when they're in kindergarten or nursery to primary or elementary school in the US to high school and ultimately through to university, design thinking needs to stop being something you learn to something that you are. It has to move from thinking to being. So we need to move maybe from design thinking to design being. And that becomes a more holistic way of looking at the world, and also eliminating the silos, the disciplinary silos that we often find like obscuring potential thought and conversation and dialogue. And finally, I think transdisciplinarity, which is going beyond the traditional disciplines, is the way to go in the future. I don't think we have a choice. If we want to create new knowledge, what in education is known as mode 2 knowledge, which sits outside traditional domains of knowledge, we need to go transdisciplinary. So in short, transdisciplinarity, STEAM, and also looking at how even engineers can start smiling because they have empathy for those that they're designing for. Thank you.